Say hello to a new friend on an old road. Take a two-lane trip of memories into mysteries unknown. Come along for the ride. Jim Hinckley's America. Jim Hinckley's America.
Good morning, Mike. How are you doing today? Excuse me. How's Mike doing this morning? Good morning, Mr. Andy. Keith, how are you doing this morning? Yeah, got that thing going in the throat again this morning. Yes, sir. Brian, how are you doing? Everyone well this morning? Andy, does this look familiar? Putting it to good use. Well, good morning, mi amigos. I am always so glad that you're able to join us on Sunday mornings. It's always a delight, a pleasure to visit with everybody. On today's program, we are going to be, let's see, how's the best way to describe this? A bit of a macabre adventure on Route 66, if you will. We're going to be visiting interesting cemeteries, and some have fascinating military connections. Others have celebrity association. And of course, I have the weekly trivia contest, the coffee cup sponsor of the week. We'll see what else we can find time for. We'll try not to run this over. Let's see. Feel free to chime in. Any questions, comments, things of that nature, and we'll get them answered to the best of my ability before we close out the program. We'll make that the last part of the get-together. We'll start with our trivia contest. We've had this going for a couple of weeks, and we came close to an answer, but not quite there. So we'll try something different. We were looking for an answer to the question, what made Alberta's hotel in Springfield unique? This was, well, a few came close, like I say, but nobody quite got it. The property was in Springfield, Missouri. It was an old city hospital that she converted, and then she bought a place down the street and opened that as a juke joint. And they were, yes, once someone had mentioned where they listed the Negro Motorist Green Book. Yes, they were. But what really made this property unique and special is it evolved to become one of the largest African-American resorts on Route 66 between Chicago and Los Angeles. Nat King Cole, Louis Armstrong, Pearl Bailey all performed there. Harlem Globetrotters were regular guests. So we didn't get an answer. So let's try a new one. And whoever comes up with the first right answer, since we're doing adventure of the macabre kind, first right answer wins a copy of Murder in Mayhem on the Main Street of America by yours truly, Tales from Bloody 66. I'll sign it. I'll even personalize it if you'd like. So here's our trivia question. Are you ready? A celebrity was profiled on the television program This Is Your Life. During the program, he was surprised with an announcement that the Route 66 corridor in his adopted hometown was being renamed as an honorarium. Do you know the name of that celebrity? Okay, let's get started with our road trip of the macabre. We're going to start in Oklahoma, Fort Reno. How many of our viewers this morning have ever stopped there during a Route 66 adventure or just exploring Oklahoma? Have you ever stopped at Fort Reno? It is really worth the time. I don't know where they're at with COVID. That's another story. But they have a very intriguing and fascinating museum because this fort is old. I mean, it dates back to the 1870s and just a real long history. But what I found most interesting of the fort, a particular interest, if you will, was the cemetery. Interred here are pioneers and soldiers from the era when this was truly the Western frontier, 1880, 1885, late 1870s. And the monuments, some of them tell really interesting stories. But what really surprised me, what really intrigued me, was to find that it was also a German and Italian military cemetery. You see, during World War II, this historic fort served as a POW camp, and the cemetery is the final resting place for 70 German and Italian soldiers that were captured during the battle for North Africa and for Sicily. And I really found that interesting. If you get a chance, take a stop by there. And I was working on this book, Route 66 Illustrated Historical Atlas, a couple of years back, and doing the research for that, I found that there was another cemetery along Route 66 in Oklahoma with a foreign military connection. On June 7th, 1941, the Spartan School of Aeronautics was established under contract to the U.S. Army Air Corps at Miami, Oklahoma. In July of that year, it became the British Training School number 3 for the Royal Air Force, the RAF. And during its 4-year history, unfortunately, there were several British pilots killed in training accidents. And they were interred at the Grand Army of the Republic Cemetery, located at 2801 North Main Street there in Miami. Yesterday, on the Jim Hinckley's America Facebook page, I posted several photos as a promotion for this morning's program. One of the photos was of a monument at the airport in Kingman, Arizona, the former Kingman Army Airfield. There are actually 2 memorials at the airfield. These are both under the World War II control tower that's next to the terminal building, which also houses a really nice little cafe. If anybody out there can correct me on this, I'd sure be appreciative, but my understanding is there's only 2 or 3 of original World War II military control towers still left in the United States. But I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. Anyway, on January 7th, 1944, at the airfield entrance, a high-speed freight train struck a bus that was transporting cadets returning from night firing exercises on the north side of Route 66. The death toll of 27 men made this the deadliest train collision in Arizona to date. As a bit of an historic footnote, the gunnery range, with its bunkers and backstops and other remnants, is still accessible. It's on the north side of Route 66, and it's really amazing. You can still find the belts, machine gun belts, spent slugs, shells. It's and of course the bunkers. Kind of a somber little place, but those monuments are under the control tower at the Kingman Airport, next to the terminal building. The second accident was a mid-air collision between a B-17 with full crew and a Texas trainer, and there were no survivors. But there's another chapter in this particular story, and it is odd. And maybe this is more of a Halloween story than a Christmas holiday story, but every time I share this story with people, I got to be honest, it makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck, and I kind of get an involuntary shiver. back around 1990, the airport hosted a Kingman Army Airfield reunion, an air show. And I was doing a little press and publicity on that event, and I met an elderly gentleman who was dying from leukemia. He was in attendance of the event as his father had been the navigator on the B-17 that went down during that mid-air collision. And that's where I also met Chris Fuller. This elderly gentleman had retained the services of Chris. He's with aviation archaeology. And the gentleman wanted to find the primary crash site of the B-17. Well, the wreckage had been strewn over just a wide swath of desert. And of course, it had been almost a half a century since the accident. And still, we found a lot of debris was located. But here's the part that'll knock your socks off. What was most astounding is that the dog tags from the man's father were found in the desert. I don't even have a clue what the odds are. I just can't even calculate that. But that isn't just really astounding. Another photo that I shared in yesterday's promotion was from the Hackberry, Arizona cemetery. Most people with Route 66, familiar with Route 66, know of the Hackberry General Store. That's relatively recent. That's in the mid-1930s on the north side of the highway. But the town itself, mostly a ghost town now, is on the south side of the tracks. National Old Trails Road and early Route 66 ran right through town. This place was once prominent enough to be given consideration as the location for the Mojave County seat. And the cemetery there dates to the 1880s. Before the pandemic of 2020, I was stunned and fascinated by the markers that indicated death from the Spanish flu in 1918 and 1919. And I never really thought at the time that I'd be a living witness to a similar event. And that was I knew of the Spanish flu pandemic 1918, but I didn't know much about it. But after I wandered around the cemetery there, it made me curious. And it led me to this book, The Great Influence of John Barry. Gets a little dry in spots. He gets technicals on how viruses replicate, how they evolve, different things of that nature. But it's a very fascinating read that reads like a novel. It's an older book, but it has extreme relevance to what we're going through now. Some of it's almost eerie. It is how much the events have been unfolding very much like today. There was a real restriction on the press. The president really downplayed the event because he was trying to, didn't want to interrupt the war effort. There was a lot of protest against face masks. So it's a great, great read if you get a chance. Next up, if you have an interest in celebrity history, I highly recommend a visit to the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, located at 6000 Santa Monica Boulevard in Los Angeles. Dating to about 1899, this is one of the oldest cemeteries in the city. And section designated the Beth Olam Cemetery. It's the oldest Jewish cemetery in the city. And it's the final resting place for a who's who of Hollywood celebrities, sports stars, politicians, and even inventors from 1910 into the 1950s. The gate, when you look out the gate towards Santa Monica Boulevard, you can see the famous Hollywood sign on the hill up above. Mel Blanc, the voice of countless characters in Bugs Bunny's cartoons. This is his final resting place. Cecil B. DeMille, the gangster Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, Tyrone Power, John Huston. Those are just a few of the notables. The lead guitarist from the Ramones, and even Toto the dog from The Wizard of Oz, all have monuments or crypts in this cemetery. Some of the graves have been updated with innovative virtual monuments that include videos of the celebrities. That makes it kind of interesting. And in 2002, a summer film festival series was launched. People bring their blankets, sit on the lawn, and films like Errol Flynn, things of that nature, are shown in a drive-in theater style on the white walls of a mausoleum. Kind of a macabre little get-together, but intriguing, to say the very least. Next up, let's go to New Mexico. Many Route 66 enthusiasts are familiar with Villa de Quebrero. That's located just to the west of Budville, there in New Mexico. Well, the village of Quebrero was bypassed by realignment of Route 66 about 1930, and a lot of people miss it. There's not much to see. It's a pretty tired little town. You can find it. It's the first right-hand turn past Budville paved road. It's a little loop. It'll go up into Quebrero and then comes out by Villa de Quebrero. The little loop drive is past weathered adobe ruins, but it's well worth the detour. The first reference to this village is on a map dated 1776. Kit Carson garrisoned here during the Navajo Wars. And the cemetery is really easily overlooked, but it's worth a visit. It even has the graves of soldiers from the Confederate States of America. Kind of an interesting little deal. If you're more interested and want to see a bit of Quebrero, I made a short video a while back on in Quebrero, and you can find that on the Jim Hinckley YouTube channel. Okay, our next stop is in Illinois. Funk's Grove. Man, I don't know about you, but anybody who's familiar with this, I cannot get enough of their maple syrup. Absolutely delicious. But a lot of people, and something I want to recommend, is the nearby Sugar Grove Nature Center. There's over 1,000 acres of forest and prairie. In fact, it's the largest remaining intact virgin growth prairie grove in the state of Illinois. It's designated a national natural landmark. And oh man, if you can see that in fall when the leaves are turning, truly spectacular. And centered in this beautiful scenery is an interesting historic church and a cemetery. The cemetery dates to 1830, and the picturesque little church to 1864. And there's a little bit of a dark chapter there, as the cemeteries weren't dark. On April 28, 2000, a monument was erected in the cemetery that was paid for with donations from Irish heritage groups. It marks the site of a mass grave. And the monument reads, "This Celtic cross honors the memory of more than 50 souls buried here in the early 1850s. These immigrants from Ireland were driven from their land of their birth by famine and disease. They arrived sick and penniless and took hard and dangerous jobs building the Chicago and Alton Railroad. Known but to God, they rest here in individual anonymity, far from the old homes of their heirs, yet forever short of the new homes of their hopes. Their sacrifices opened interior Illinois and made it possible to develop the riches of the land we share today." The people buried there were victims of a cholera epidemic that swept the railroad camps during the early and mid-1850s. And the Funk family allowed them to be buried in the family cemetery, as Catholics were not allowed internment in the Protestant cemeteries at area churches. Kind of an interesting deal. I wrote about this and some other places in my book, Murder and Mayhem on the Main Street of America. At the Oak Park Cemetery, we'll go back to Oklahoma. This one is in Chandler, Oklahoma. He is a surprisingly simple little stone marker. And, you know, it's tall, but it's simple with an inscription. And it marks the grave of William Matthew Big Bill Tilghman Jr. And considering this fella's incredible life, the obscurity of his grave is, well, it caught me off guard when I first visited the cemetery. I was doing some research on another project, and I'd heard that he was there, and I happened to be traveling Route 66, so I thought I would take a look, and it really surprised me. Is anybody familiar with Big Bill? Tilghman? Boy, he was something else. He was born on the 4th of July in 1854 and had no education, no formal education at all. But he learned the skills necessary for life on the western frontier at a very early age. By age 15, he was a successful buffalo hunter with his older brother, Richard. And then in the mid-1870s, his hunting party was attacked by a band of Indians. His older brother was killed. In fact, Tilghman was the only survivor of what turned out to be a 3-day battle. And after ending his career as a hunter, he moved to Dodge City, Kansas, and became a saloon owner, even though he was a teetotaler, didn't drink. And while in Dodge City, he was a participant in the Dodge City War with Wild Bill Hickok, Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson, and Dave Mather. And during the war with the Cheyenne in 1878, he signed on the United States Cavalry as an Indian scout and had some pretty hair-raising incidents in that position. And later that year, he accepted an offer from Bat Masterson to serve as the deputy sheriff there. And then in 1889, he moved on to Guthrie, Oklahoma, and was appointed deputy U.S. Marshal by Judge Isaac Parker, the infamous hanging judge. And Tilghman and his two deputy marshals, Chris Madsen and Heck Thomas, they became known as the three guardsmen of the territory. And they were an absolute terror to outlaws. Together, they accounted for over 300 arrests and a number of killings. And one of his more famous accomplishments was his single-handed capture of Bill Doolin in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. And then in the early 1900s, he became fed up with the way Hollywood was glamoring the outlaws of the day. So in the mid-teens, he and his friends, E. Dix, the U.S. Marshal, Chris Madsen, they wrote and starred as themselves in the film Passing of the Oklahoma Outlaws to show how things really were back then. I do not know if this movie has survived. I should have looked that up, and I will check on that. But it might be an interesting film to see. I think this was done around 1915 or 16. They even managed to get one of their old outlaw nemesis, Arkansas Tom, released from prison for the movie. Tilghman retired from law enforcement in 1910, was elected to the Oklahoma State Senate. In 1911, he accepted the position of police chief of Oklahoma City, retired again, and then in 1924, about at the age of 70, the citizens of Cromwell, Oklahoma, talked him into kind of cleaning up. They had a real problem there. It was a really corrupt city of gambling, and it was bad. He took the job as city marshal. And on November 1st, 1924, a corrupt, drunken federal prohibition officer, Wiley Lynn, got into a struggle with Tilghman during an attempted arrest. Lynn pulled a concealed weapon and shot him in the stomach. Tilghman died 20 minutes later. I don't know if there's ever been a movie made about the Tilghman story, but if you're a writer and looking for a subject, that's a story. Well, I noticed the time here, so I hope you've enjoyed our macabre Route 66 adventure this morning. And of course, if you'd like to find more places like this on Route 66, I do have the two books to recommend. Shameless Self-Promotion, Murder and Mayhem on the Main Street of America, and the illustrated Route 66 Historic Atlas. Two books I think you might find of interest. And now, our coffee mug sponsor of the week, Mojave Museum of History and Arts in Kingman, Arizona. You know, the Powerhouse Museum is very interesting, but the Mojave Museum of History and Arts, that's a portal to just a wealth of adventure in the Kingman area. And if it's your first visit, you will be pleasantly surprised. And if it's your 10th visit, you're going to be pleasantly surprised. Unfortunately, we no longer have Andy Sanson's smiling face there, but still a great place to visit. Hey, if you'd like your business, museum, or community featured, just send us a mug. Simple as that. This free promotional opportunity is made possible in part through the magic of crowdfunding on our Patreon-based website. But if you want to add a check or cash to the mug, I won't complain. My parting thought for the day is this. Gullibility and ignorance are poor substitutes for wisdom and leadership. That's never been more true than it is in the modern era with the internet. There's really no excuse for ignorance. We can watch cat videos or we can educate ourselves. Well, my friends, I guess we're about wrapping this up for the week. I want to thank Connie Eccles for her careful stewardship of the gem that is the Wagon Wheel Motel in Cuba, Missouri. And I want to thank her for her sponsorship of this program. Well, let's see what we got for comments and questions here this morning. Mr. Mike and Keith, Andy, all the way from Tucson, good morning. And Brian, thanks for asking, Mike. I'm doing okay. I learned a long time ago, every day is good. Some days are just better than others. My good friend Wolfgang, all the way from Germany. I hope you're doing well this morning. Michael, good morning to you. And Frank's with us from Illinois. Well, Andy, why am I not surprised that you got the trivia contest? Hey, when we wrap this up, I will get your address and I'll send you a book. Nolan, you're usually pretty quick on this, but I think Andy beat you this time. Michael, I would like that. Why don't you just send me a message sometime and let's get us a cup of coffee, or if it's social distancing or whatever we're doing, we can round up something and go out to Fort Beale Springs or something of that nature. Andy, no, I'm sorry. Will Rogers was not. It was actually Andy Devine. He was on This Is Your Life in 1955, and the good folks in Kingman renamed Front Street, which was the Route 66 corridor, they renamed that Andy Devine Avenue. Yeah, Mike, you're right. The church there was built by the German POWs. The cemetery in Fort Reno is interesting. The entire fort is well worth a visit. Andy, not that I'm aware of. There was never a cemetery at Fort Beale, to the best of my knowledge. Now, my understanding, and this is vague, my understanding is that the deaths, and there were just a few at Camp Beale Springs. I should say, when I say there's just a few military personnel, I understand they were interred at Fort Mojave. Now, the Wallapai, because that was the first, for lack of a better word, internment camp during the Wallapai Wars, and before they were force marched down to the Colorado River. I don't have a lot of information, but I know there was a lot of death there. Yeah, Mike, I'm glad. Isn't for that Funk's Grove Nature Preserve, that Sugar Wood Grove, is really, really beautiful. Really a nice place. No, Nolan, that's a cemetery I am not familiar with. And perhaps you can give us a little more detail on that a little in the future. We can talk about that. Brian, you bet. Well, Car Show Dan from Godley, Illinois. How are you doing today, Daniel? Keith, thank you very much. Miss Linda, how are you doing today? Well, folks, I hope you've enjoyed this. We're going to... I always want to thank you for joining us on Sunday mornings, taking time. I hope that I give you a little bit of a break from the never-ending election and the COVID situation and the apocalyptic year of 2020. I hope this half hour helps give us a little bit of a break for that. I don't want to sound flippant. My thoughts, I'm heavily burdened by the thought of all the families suffering economically this year, the families who've suffered loss and illness with COVID. I try to put a happy face on what I do, and we try not to get too dark here, even though this morning we've been visiting cemeteries, but can't help but think about all those families during this holiday season. It's going to be a somber time for a lot of folks. I do hope that you can join me next Sunday morning for another episode of Coffee with Jim. And if there's nobody else got anything else to chime in about, I will bid adios. Until next week. I got lots of things I'd like to be doing, and I'd like to get back to our on-the-road programs. I am starting to do my presentations via Zoom. That's being made possible through our crowdfunding, since there's no real speaking fees. Tomorrow I'll be speaking about Route 66 travel to the Rotary Club in El Paso, Texas. And next month I have 3 presentations I'll be doing. Folks, thank you so very, very much. And Brian, I'm glad you found this interesting. And Brian, I know it's I don't have words. I mean, I really don't. And I know that it's a hot subject we don't want to get too deep into, but we're facing one of the biggest health crises that we faced in a century. But how do we balance that with the economics? And I don't have a clue. I'm sorry the cozy dog's suffering. I know a lot of business owners up and down Route 66 are economically suffering. And I know a few that are suffering economically with that, as well as COVID in their family. You're right, Linda. It does weigh on our minds heavily. Frank, thank you. I'm glad that you enjoyed this. And yes, we'll see you next Sunday. Ian, good morning. Good to see you here. And my friends, you take care and have a good week. And we'll do this again next week. We'll come up with something I hope that's equally interesting. Vaya con Dios, mi amigos.